What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Funnel Vision Show, where we talk with marketers and entrepreneurs from all over the world who can help you really take your business to the next level. And today is no different. Today, I have a guest who I've known for actually quite a few years, part of SaaS Academy, has been one of my coaches and helped me throughout my journey growing my software. But ultimately, he also has his own agency, his own software, and has helped a lot of different businesses grow. Marcel Petitpas, thank you so much for being on. I'm very excited for you to share everything you're going to share about profitability and maintaining profitability and increasing profitability for agencies. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, man. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's going to be a fun conversation. I'm very excited to dive into your world a little bit. Normally, it's always been you coaching me. Now I get to extract a little bit of what you do and how you help businesses. So as always, what we do with the Funnel Vision Show is I don't like to necessarily read out accolades and all that stuff. Instead, I'm going to let you tell the audience, what are your humble bragging rights? What have you been able to do for your clients? What have you been able to do for your own business? In other words, why should people listen?
As uncomfortable as it is, I will go through the rap sheet. So I'm the CEO and co-founder of a company called Parakeeto. And we've had the privilege of working with over 100 agencies in the last few years, helping them measure and improve their profitability. And some of our clients have been able to do things like grow 90% year over year for 3 years in a row, while increasing profits by over 500%. And this is the part that I'm most proud of, actually decreasing the amount of overtime and weekend work that their team was doing in that process. 3 things that people think can't happen in tandem. Those are the kinds of results that we're able to get for clients when they develop a deep understanding over the unit economics of their business and the specific things they can do to move those unit economics in the right direction. So that's the primary thing that I do. I'm also the host of a podcast called the Agency Profit Podcast, where we talk about agency profitability. I think I can say it's the #1 podcast on agency profitability, probably because it's the only one. And as you mentioned earlier, I'm also the head strategic coach at SaaS Academy by Dan Martell, which is the largest B2B software coaching company in the world. And there I'm also helping software companies, with marketing, but also now increasingly with how to design the professional services sides of their business, as a lot of software companies are getting back into adopting professional services as a way to fill out their client journey, in the same that we've done that at Parakeeto. So that's what I do.
It's very interesting that kind of you have the SaaS world mixed with the agency world. It's a very common kind of path for SaaS businesses. I did the same thing. I have my agency. Then I was like, oh, let's build a software, thinking it's the easiest thing in the world. Of course, it's not. And then you go and launch a software. And then you realize, yeah, like there is this merge between services and software. Tell me, let's take it a little bit back. Before you were able to help over 100 agencies, before you found that, okay, I'm going to help you with profitability, before Parakeeto, walk me through the journey. What were you doing? How did you get to this?
Yeah, my first business ever, like a lot of people, was an agency. And we were doing, at the time, virtual real estate tours, but like before you could do it with your iPhone and before Matterport was a thing. So we'd go into a house, we'd take a gazillion pictures, we'd stitch those pictures into 3D images, we'd load those 3D images into a 3D modeling software, and we would build a 3D model of the house that you could tour with a VR headset or on a computer back in like 2014, 2015. So pretty early days for the tech on that. And we had shitty unit economics in that business. Like, real estate agents were willing to pay us a couple $100 to do this thing that took, in some cases, 30 or 40 hours to do. And so it became very clear early in that business that either the business model needed to fundamentally change, or it was never going to be more than like a hobby, essentially, for me. And we just didn't have enough cash flow in that business to scale. And so that's where I became familiar with this challenge. And then, like you, I was like, hey, you know what? Agencies suck. Let me start a software business because I have a superiority complex, and I'm projecting the superiority complex onto you, but I definitely have one, right? So I was like, oh, I'm better than everyone. So why don't I just go do the hardest possible thing in entrepreneurship and build a software company with having no experience and being like a young 20-something-year-old person. So I failed at that for several years and learned a lot of lessons. That's where I met Dan Martell, who is a mutual connection of ours. And he eventually connected me to Jared, who was my original co-founder at Parakeeto. And Jared just called me up one day and said, hey, dude, I spend 2 days a week in spreadsheets trying to answer all these questions that are simple but complicated. Are we making money on clients and projects in our agency? Is our team busy enough? When do we need to hire people? What if we do get this project? What if we don't? So these are all the kinds of things that as the owner of an agency, you're thinking about every day, but getting the data together to help inform that was really hard. And he said, there's got to be a better way to do this. And that was the impetus for us saying, okay, let's try to solve this problem. And we started Parakeeto as a result of that.
And Parakeeto is what?
Great question. It's been in flux for a long time. Today, I would call us a technology enabled consulting firm. So we have proprietary software that we've built and that we use to help our clients get those results and outcomes. But there's also a very significant portion of what we do with clients, which is consulting and coaching. So it's like the best way that you could think about it is if you hire an accounting firm, they're going to bring QuickBooks into your business to help manage all of the data, but they're also going to help make sure the data in there is clean. They're going to meet with you to talk about the data and the results and what you should do about it. So we take a very similar approach, but for a more holistic set of information in the agency, primarily the operations data. So projects, people, and time, and making sure that the leading indicators for profitability are healthy so that you're not surprised when you get your financial reports back from your accountant and you figure out, oh shit, we're making a lot less money than we thought we were.
Yeah, it's funny. Funalytics has gone through similar evolution where I would also call it a technology enabled consultancy is a pretty good word. But a lot of our clients, I think you go through this game in the software space, especially if it's a software that solves a specific job to be done function in that way where, okay, who is going to do this in the company, right? Who's going to actually log into this platform, do this thing? And then you realize, okay, if you don't solve that piece for them, they're just going to churn and not keep paying you. So you went through this journey and you, at what stage? So you met Jared, you're like, okay, I'm going to go start this software business. And it was all centered around profitability. Why? What was that kind of tipping point in your journey to be like, man, this is the one problem I want to build a software around and I want to solve?
It was interesting because I resonated with the problem because I had dealt with it as an agency owner. Jared obviously was pretty passionate about this because it was at that time as the CEO of a service-based business, he was spending an inordinate amount of his time on it. And then what really cemented this for me was we met and we said, okay, we have a thesis here. Profitability, measuring profitability inside of agencies is a challenge. Let's validate this thesis by doing customer development, right? The thing you should always do. So I spent that summer, this is 2018. Every day I would wake up, I'd send about 300 cold emails to agency owners. And so I would do that in the morning, and then in the afternoon I would book calls. And I probably spoke to 50 or 60 agency owners between July and September. During that time, I was able to pre-sell 10 of them into what I called our founder circle, which was like early adopters for this platform that we're going to build. We didn't have really anything built at that point, but we had mock-ups and screenshots of like conceptually what the product was going to look like. At that time, we thought this was going to be like a pure SaaS company. We could talk about why we learned that wasn't really going to work later on. But in that process, every single agency that I talked to, once I pierced through the armor, it became very clear that nobody had a handle on this stuff. Like beyond getting a P&L from their accountant, almost nobody felt like they had a good workflow. They really understood these numbers, that it was effective. They really had a nuanced grip on this, or their teams did. And the people that I did talk to that felt like that had tried to build their own inbound homegrown solutions. And in a lot of cases, when I pressed them on how much time has gone into that and what's the value of that time, many of them had spent $250,000, $500,000, like building these internal SaaS platforms to try and solve this problem. And so that's when I realized, okay, this is not only a very common problem, but it's one that people are willing to spend a crazy amount of money to solve because it's so significant and so material to them.
Yeah, it's cash is king, right? At the end of the day, if you can't figure out how to manage your cash, if you can't figure out how to manage your profits, you get no money at the end of the month and things start to slip very quickly. It becomes a really tough business. Walk me through that transition. Actually, I am curious as to thought this was going to be a pure SaaS play. Where did you realize maybe not?
Yeah, it took us longer than it should have to come to that realization. It took us 2 failed products in almost 3 years to like finally clue in. And it's so funny because the answer was right under our nose the entire time. But the first, let's call it 18 months of the business was marked by us trying to build this initial version of the product, which was basically a dashboard for reporting on all of these metrics. But what it required was for you as a user to input all of your data into the system. And the data needed to be pretty friggin' clean and free of errors and mistakes. And so the 10 people that we pre-sold onto this platform, and then we pre-sold more after that, exactly 0 of them were successful because their data was always a mess. And so we were like, oh shit, this critical assumption of people's data is going to be clean enough to do this was wrong. So then we built an entire other product that was focused on trying to fix the data inputs. It took us 18 months to figure out that's also a fool's errand, and you can never fully solve that problem. Like, people are going to make mistakes at the input. And eventually we came to realize that there are essentially 3 components that you need to have clean data inside of the business. First, you need the data, the raw data. So finance, time, people, projects. Those are the 4 data sets. And that's easy. That's a very solved problem. Time tracking tools are basically free. Project management tools are easy to come by. There's tons of them. QuickBooks, Xero, like those data sets everybody has them. But the 2 things that are missing are what we figured out over those 3 years. Number 1 is a framework. So it's one thing to have the data. It's another thing to understand what metrics should we track. Exactly how should we calculate those metrics? That's quite a nuanced one. And then what is the relationship between these metrics so that when one of them goes up or down, we understand what the implications are on the rest of the system. We actually have an understanding of what that means for the business. And like an example in SaaS for this would be like churn. Okay, it's easy to say we're going to measure churn, but it's a little bit more nuanced to say, what's the basis for that? Is it a trial? Is it somebody that converts to paid? Is it someone that converts to paid and then actually sticks around longer than 30 days? And what exactly is churn? Are we measuring logo churn? Are we measuring revenue churn? Are we going to count expansion and do that in absolute terms? So the details of that matters a lot. And the same thing was true with all the metrics. That's piece number 2. We need the data, then we need a framework to know, hey, what are we actually measuring? And then the last piece, this was the big realization for the services, is you actually need a process. Because if we assume that data is going to be messy and it's going to have mistakes, data is going to change structures over time. We're going to change naming conventions. We're going to change tools. We're going to change how we structure things inside of those tools, et cetera. And a lot of these metrics can't be tracked in real time. So we need these cadences where we're reconciling sets of data so that when we look at a metric, we have all of the inputs to that metric for the same time period, and it's complete and it's clean. So we actually need a process and a person to run that process, to keep the data clean, to clean it up, to look for mistakes, to stitch it together. And so those are the 3 components that you need for this to function properly. And when we were selling people a tool, they were missing the framework and they were missing the process. And that's where we said, okay, we need to bring our services into the mix so that we can help pull their business through the framework and install that way of thinking in the business, and then actually help them run the process on an ongoing basis that leads to reliable, useful outputs in the system and do that job for them. So to your point, the job to be done. And yeah, we came to that at a quarterly offsite where we were becoming increasingly frustrated with not getting traction. And we just said, hey, what if we started over? And it didn't even have to be a profitable business. We just designed like the best possible solution to this problem. What would it look like? And by the end of that exercise, we realized like, oh, I think we could actually do this. And we pivoted and that day.
Yeah, that's fascinating and interesting. Does a part of you look back, that little ego part of you look back and be like, SaaS? You see those like high growing 10 million, 50 million ARR SaaS companies. You're like, wow, why?
Yeah. And here's the funny thing is, by embracing services, we actually sped up the path to potentially achieve that outcome. That's still an outcome that is maybe on the table for us. We have a thesis on how we would accomplish it. But funny enough, we're actually moving faster towards that now that we've embraced services. And I could talk a little bit more about why that is. But yeah, it's funny. The reason it took us 3 years to get to the point where we actually started solving the problem for real was because we were applying this arbitrary constraint. As founders, like, we wanted to build a SaaS company. We wanted to be SaaS founders. It was about us, and we were constraining our ability to actually serve our customers based on these things that we wanted that were not that important, honestly. So it's this funny thing that in hindsight, it's like I'm kicking myself for, because we actually could have made progress a lot faster. And anyway, the long and short is, now that we've monetized all of the things that software companies actually need to do to build great product, which is like talk to their customers, get deep in the weeds with them, validate solutions early, build scrappy minimum viable products. Like, consulting is all of that same stuff. It's customer success, it's support, it's custom development, it's integrations, it's customer interviews. You're just getting paid for it. That's the funny thing is like people get poo-pooed on for having professional services revenue in their SaaS company. And it's, we're doing all the same stuff that other SaaS companies are doing. We're just monetizing it.
Exactly. You're just getting paid for it.
Yeah. So it's like, how does that make us less good?
No, you're right. And it's an interesting dilemma that we face as SaaS founders, because we want to, you think the holy grail is, hey, product led, people just come in, adopt the Canva world, right? That's what most people want. You never have to speak to somebody. You maybe have a few tickets and all that stuff, but people are just flying in and sticking. But in most of these kind of more solution focused companies, like that process and framework aspect is a big key, right? It's a big component to this. And if you can have the right people in there, what's nice about that is you're basically building the product for you, doing the process, and you're improving it, making it simpler, easier, etc. Because now you just want it to be easier for you, which ultimately makes it easier for the client if you do get down that SaaS model.
And that's the whole thing, right? Is like the powerful thing about this, to your point, is by monetizing these things that are necessary to get customers to the outcome that they are paying us for, we turn it from a cost center that needs to be reduced, right? So if you've ever tried to, I don't know, interact with support with one of these massive SaaS companies, that they see support as a cost center. So they're doing everything to try to get you not to reach out to support. They're doing everything to try to get an AI bot to answer you. So like the quality of that experience degrades because they're trying to minimize their investment there. Whereas in our situation, if we turn that into a product, then we're incentivized to actually improve that product. We have more resources to invest in that experience in that product. So it actually is better at serving the customer. And so what's ironic about this, and this is a fundamental belief about profitability, is like profitability serves the customer if you're doing it right. It should not come at the expense of the customer, because it should give you more resources and a better posture to serve that stakeholder with, and more resources to do it.
So let's talk about profitability. What do you know? We talked about this framework of, okay, I need the data, the framework, and the process. This is very high level for somebody to wrap their heads around. If I want to be more profitable in my agency, if I want that case study that you just mentioned at the very beginning, where I get 5x more profit, my revenue increases 90% year over year, and my team doesn't have to work on weekends, and what is the actual framework? What is the playbook for that?
Yeah. So in terms of the numbers, there is basically one metric that sets the foundation for the profitability of a service-based business. And there's three operational numbers that we pay very close attention to that will determine how healthy that financial number is. So the financial number is something that we call delivery margin. And if you have a financial background, you could think of that as being essentially the same as gross margin. I just call it something different because I don't want to argue with accountants over semantic issues. So I call it delivery margin. And what delivery margin essentially describes is for every dollar that you get paid from a customer, after you remove pass-through expenses. So pass-through expense, for example, would be I have to collect ad spend from the customer and then spend it on Facebook ads. Okay, that money was never mine in the first place. So after we remove all of that, how much money did we make from the customer? And then what did it cost us to earn that revenue by actually getting the promise that we made to the customer delivered? So for example, if you pay me 100 grand for a website, and I spend $50,000 on labor and tools to build that website for you, then I had a 50% delivery margin on that website. So the goal in a service-based business is to have at least a 50% delivery margin on the profit and loss statement. So you're never spending more than 50 cents of every dollar that clients pay you to get the work done. And what that means is you now have 50% of that money left over to invest in overhead and or have come through the business as profit. And most agencies are going to spend between 20 and 30% of their income on overhead. So that's sales and marketing, customer acquisition, administration, lawyers, accountants, et cetera, facilities, if they have an office, taxes, licenses, all that kind of stuff. So to me, the stronger your delivery margin is, the easier it is to be profitable. It's truly the foundation. Without that, everything's going to feel hard. And with that, everything starts to feel like an option. You start to get to choose if you want to pour more money into sales and marketing to grow faster, or you want to not do that and just pull it out as profit. So Delivery margin is the foundation. If you have strong delivery margin, you're much more likely to be profitable. So we focus on that metric. And then there's really only 3 ways to improve delivery margin. And those are the ops metrics that we pay attention to because you can measure them much more quickly, much more frequently, and do it much less expensively than with finance data. And then you can predict what your P&L is going to look like ahead of time. So that framework is really paying attention to average cost per hour, which determines the cost side of that equation. So to the extent that you can lower the average cost of an hour of labor in your agency, you'll typically have less labor cost on the P&L to earn that revenue with. And then you have average billable rate, which measures for every hour that we spend doing work for clients, on average, how much revenue does that earn for us across all the different things that we do and sell. And the last one is utilization rate. For all the time that we buy across our team, what percentage of that time is used to actually earn revenue and get things done for clients? Those are really the 3 vectors that if you can be on track and optimize those 3 numbers, you can dramatically increase your delivery margin, which just is essentially oxygen for the profitability of the business.
So everything falls from a cascading effect of the delivery margin, and then based on these 3 core metrics is what you look at.
That's pretty much it.
And what you guys do with agencies is you help them really get clear on those things. You plug in your software to make it easier and all of that stuff. But really, that's what you're in the business of, is helping them get clear on their delivery margin.
Yeah, we also help them get clear on their overhead spending and stuff like that. But what I can tell you is after looking at over 100 agencies, I could count on one hand the number of agencies that their problem was they were spending too much on overhead. Like it just doesn't really happen that often. And if it does, that's it's not easy, but it's a very simple thing to fix. You go through your P&L and you cut stuff. You get rid of software you're not using, right? You hire a cheaper accounting firm. There's things you can do to cut your overhead. That's fairly straightforward. But it's usually a Band-Aid solution to the real problem, which is the delivery margin is not high enough. And so that tends to be where we spend the majority of our focus because it's the most common problem and it's also where all the leverage is.
Marcel, we're coming up on time, but I always love to ask every single guest on this show, because what's interesting is I've interviewed over 30 guests now, and not a single person gives me the exact same answer, which is fascinating to me because we're all marketers and we all love shiny objects. What is your number one growth tactic?
I'll just share what's worked for us, right? So we built a 7-figure business at Parakeeto, and we pretty much did it doing exactly what's happening right now. It's a little bit meta, but my whole philosophy has been I could try to build my own audience from the start, or I could go find people that already have an audience and borrow it from them. And that's what I'm doing right now. I'm borrowing your audience, Michael, and I appreciate you letting me borrow that attention. And I do that by adding value. Hopefully, this has been valuable to the people that are listening. And so this helped me get our initial clients and start building our brand and build our own audience. So to me, if I was to start another business tomorrow, this is the same strategy that I would use.
Yeah, it's funny. You're actually the second person. This is the first time somebody said something similar. However, they said it on the opposite side, which is starting their own podcast and starting their own show, which you've done. And you've obviously, it's been a big part of it. But being on other people's shows is borrowing other people's audiences. It's a tactic that I've done for a long time, and it works really well. Marcel, where can people learn more about you, and where can people learn more about Parakeeto?
If you run an agency or a creative services firm and you want to learn more about how to improve your profitability, I put together a free set of resources at parakeeto.com/toolkit. So at no cost to you, you can get access to training videos, templates, cheat sheets to help you start to analyze and improve your profitability. So I encourage everyone to go check that out. And there's tons of other free stuff at parakeeto.com to help you out there. Of course, if you want to connect with me, you can find me on LinkedIn. I'm easy to find, and feel free to send me a DM. I'm always a sucker for answering questions in the DM, so don't be afraid to reach out and we could chop it up there.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being a guest on our show, and thank you so much for sharing your wisdom. It's one of those things that is extremely important to grow your profitabilities if you want to grow your agency. So thanks again.
Thank you.